My brother's wedding ruined me. I walked into the reception and caught my husband grinding on the bride. They'd been sleeping together for months, calling me his backup plan, while spending my Etsy profits on their getaways. When I exposed them, he smirked. She screamed, jealous. And my family had me dragged out. But I left a USB under his seat that played their dirty voicemails during the toast. I can still hear the stupid pop song the DJ was blasting when my entire life detonated. It was one of those top 40 hits that everyone pretends to hate but still screams along to when they're drunk. My brother's new wife, my now ex-husband's secret girlfriend, was in the middle of the dance floor, white dress sparkling under the lights, and my husband had his hands on her hips. Grinding, smiling, laughing like they hadn't just spent months lying to my face. I froze in the doorway, clutching the tiny box that held the congrats gift I'd made from my Etsy shop, custom glass coasters with their initials. The same shop whose profits they'd apparently been using for their little weekend getaways. It took a few seconds before my brain caught up to what my eyes were seeing. Then she turned, saw me, and didn't even flinch. She smiled, like I was just another guest she'd fooled. And my husband, Mark, looked right at me and mouthed something that made my stomach drop. "Don't cause a scene." That's when everything went red. My brother, Ryan, was off somewhere with the groomsmen, probably drunk and oblivious. The rest of my family was laughing, clinking glasses, taking photos. And I stood there realizing that everyone had been in on something except me. Because the way her bridesmaids looked at me, like they'd been waiting for this, told me this wasn't new. This had been going on long before tonight. I didn't even realize I'd started walking toward them until someone, my mom, I think, grabbed my arm and whispered, "Not now, please, just let them have their day." Their day. My husband and my brother's wife's day. I ripped my arm away and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Are you two done grinding, or do you want to go find a room like usual?" The music stopped. The bride's mouth fell open, and someone actually gasped. I could feel every eye in that reception hall burning into me. Mark stepped forward, putting on his fake, calm-down voice. "You're embarrassing yourself, Lauren." I laughed, but it came out sharp and shaky. "No, I think you two did that for me months ago." Then she, the bride, my new sister-in-law, Megan, sneered and said, "God, you're jealous. This is why he didn't want to marry you first." My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd faint. I saw my mom shake her head and signal the security guy by the door. Before I could say another word, he started walking toward me. They were going to throw me out. So I dropped my little gift box right there on the floor, turned on my heel, and walked out. But not before I did one last thing, something I'd been planning since the moment I found the photos on Mark's phone a week before. Under his chair at the head table, taped to the bottom, was a tiny black USB stick. I'd planted it that morning before the ceremony. It was set to autoplay through the reception sound system when someone plugged in the slideshow for the toast. Inside were 4 voicemails. From her, from him, from the nights they thought I was asleep. And as I reached my car, I heard the faint feedback of a microphone through the open doors behind me, followed by the first words of his voice, echoing through the hall. "God, I can't believe she still thinks you're just helping with wedding planning." Then a scream. Then chaos. And I smiled for the first time in weeks. To understand how all of this blew up, you have to know how tightly our lives were tangled together before the wedding. Mark and I had been married for 4 years. We weren't perfect, but we were stable. He worked in it for a logistics company, and I ran a small Etsy shop that actually did well, custom resin art, wedding keepsakes, that kind of thing. I was the one who helped with my brother's wedding theme, designed the invitations, even handcrafted Megan's bridal bouquet myself. Yeah, I literally made the bouquet for the woman sleeping with my husband. Megan had come into our lives through Ryan, my younger brother. She was charming in that over-the-top, everyone loves me way. She had this bubbly, performative energy that could make people forget she was saying something mean. The kind of person who called other women sweetie, but said it like an insult. When Ryan introduced her to me 2 years ago, I thought she was just insecure. She'd cling to him in group settings, interrupt me whenever I talked, and once even accidentally spilled wine on my new dress at Thanksgiving. I let it go, because I love my brother, and because Mark told me I was overthinking it. Looking back, I think he was already defending her because something was already happening. It started small, late-night texts between them about wedding planning, random errands together, jokes that got just a little too flirty. I brushed it off because that's what trust does, it blinds you. About 8 months before the wedding, Mark started acting weird. He'd stay late at work. He changed his phone password because of a company security policy. He suddenly started caring about how he dressed again, wearing cologne I didn't recognize. When I asked what was up, he'd sigh and say, "Not everything's about you, Lauren." We were trying for a baby then. I remember the night he forgot to come home after his supposed client dinner, and I sat up until 3 a.m. waiting for him. He came in smelling like cheap champagne and something floral, not my perfume. That was the night I started keeping notes. I saved receipts, took screenshots, backed up photos. The Etsy profits that were supposed to go toward a down payment on a bigger place started draining faster than I could track. He blamed software fees. I checked the transactions. It was hotel bookings and Airbnb stays under fake names. The thing that really broke me. A month before the wedding, I caught a voicemail while he was in the shower. It was Megan, laughing softly, saying, "I love how easy it is, she never suspects a thing. Just keep being nice to her, she's your backup plan anyway." Backup plan. That phrase looped in my head for days. I thought I was going crazy. I tried to confront Mark, but he flipped it, made me feel paranoid, even cried, saying he was stressed and I was destroying our marriage with my suspicion. Then came the wedding week. My mom asked me to stay with Megan at her parents' house to help with last-minute prep. I said yes, because I was still that idiot trying to be the good sister, the peacekeeper. That's when I found the final proof. A photo on Megan's iPad, her in a hotel mirror, wearing the same robe I'd bought for my honeymoon, his phone visible in the reflection on the nightstand. That's when I stopped crying and started planning. After finding that photo, something in me just shut off. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was this cold, electric focus. Every time I saw either of them smiling, pretending, it fueled me. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend. I knew if I exploded too soon, they'd twist it to make me look crazy. Mark was good at that, calm, logical, the patient husband. Megan played innocent like she'd trained for it. If I wanted to ruin them, I had to do it smart, so I acted normal. I helped Megan with her bridal prep that week, ironing her robe, fixing her flower arrangements, listening to her babble about how Ryan is so stable, not like other guys. Every word made me want to vomit. Mark, meanwhile, was staying at my brother's place with the groomsmen, pretending to be the helpful brother-in-law. But when he thought I wasn't looking, he'd sneak glances at her like they shared some private joke. The night before the wedding, there was a small rehearsal dinner at my parents' house. Mark sat next to me, Megan across the table. Halfway through the meal, my brother leaned over to her and said, "Can you believe it's really happening?" She smiled sweetly at him, but her eyes, God, her eyes, flicked to Mark for a half second. That's all it took for my stomach to twist. I think Mark noticed me watching because he grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed it too hard, whispering, "Don't start anything." I smiled right back at him and said, "Wouldn't dream of it." That night, while he was asleep, I went through his phone again. I already knew the passcode. It wasn't his birthday or mine, it was hers. I pulled every voicemail, every text, every photo I could find. I transferred them to my laptop, cleaned the phone so he wouldn't notice, then made 4 separate audio files, one for each voicemail I'd found. Each one worse than the last. The first was flirty, light. The second was explicit. The third was Megan whispering about their plans after the wedding, laughing about how Ryan was too nice to ever notice. And the fourth was her saying, "We'll tell her eventually." I mean, she's used to being second choice. I took those clips, merged them into one audio file, and programmed it to autoplay when plugged into a sound system. I disguised the USB stick as part of the slideshow folder, the same one I'd volunteered to handle for the reception. I even labeled it, Toast's Final Version. The morning of the wedding, I showed up early under the excuse of helping the coordinator set up. I was calm, too calm. People actually complimented me on being so supportive. I watched Megan walk down the aisle to marry my brother while my husband, her lover, stood next to him as best man. I stood there smiling for photos, holding my bouquet, pretending my entire world wasn't rotting under the surface. But when the ceremony ended and they moved us to the reception hall, I slipped behind the head table. While everyone was taking pictures outside, I knelt down and taped that tiny black USB to the bottom of Mark's chair, right near where the AV guy would plug in the slideshow laptop. The timer was set. All I had to do was wait for the toasts. I thought I'd already seen the worst of it. I really believed the cheating was the big betrayal. But what I learned that night, the things that came after the voicemails played, showed me I didn't even know half of it. The USB started during the toast, exactly like I planned. Mark was supposed to stand up and give this long, emotional speech about how happy he was for my brother and Megan. I'd seen his notes earlier. It was full of fake sentimental lines like, "When you find your person, you just know." Yeah, he knew all right. He stood, glass in hand, about to speak, when the first voicemail started blasting through the speakers. "Hey baby," Megan's voice purred, echoing through the entire hall. "I'm still thinking about last night. God, I love how risky this is," someone gasped. Then came his voice, low and unmistakable. "Don't worry, she'll never find out. She's too busy making her little crafts." Every conversation in the room stopped. The DJ scrambled toward the booth, but the audio was already rolling into the next clip, Megan laughing, saying, "We'll tell them eventually, right? Or maybe we just don't." I wish I could have seen their faces up close, but I was standing near the doorway, halfway gone already. I saw people pointing, whispering. My brother looked stunned, frozen. Then the fourth clip hit. "Honestly," she said, voice sharper now, "if Ryan wasn't such a people pleaser, I'd just pick you. He's safe. You're fun. She's what's the word, convenient." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark started shouting over the mic, This was edited. Someone's trying to ruin this wedding." And Megan, still in her white dress, ripped the mic out of his hand and screamed, "You told me you deleted those." That's when my brother finally stood up, face pale. "What the hell is going on?" Megan's eyes darted between the three of us, me, my husband, my brother, and I saw the exact second she realized there was no talking her way out. She pointed at me. "She did this. She's been obsessed with Mark since college." It hit me like a punch, because the way Ryan's face changed told me he wasn't surprised by that accusation. He believed her. That's when I learned betrayal has layers. It wasn't just Mark and Megan. My own family had already picked sides before I even opened my mouth. My mom rushed forward, saying, "Lauren, please just leave. Don't ruin this day more than you already have." Ruin this day. The day my husband and my brother's wife were exposed for cheating, I was the one ruining it. I left. I didn't cry until I was halfway home. But when I finally sat on the edge of my bed, shaking, I noticed a notification pop up on my phone. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You think that was bad? You don't even know what they really did to you." Attached was a photo. It was a picture of a bank statement, my business account, the one tied to my Etsy shop. Several large withdrawals I didn't recognize, all going to an account under Mark's name. And the signature on the transfer authorization form? Ryan's. That message wrecked me for about a day. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. Just stared at that screenshot until it felt burned into my skull. My husband, my brother, my sister-in-law, all tangled in the same web, and I was the idiot spider they'd been feeding on. I called the bank the next morning. They confirmed what I already suspected. Mark had been moving money from my Etsy business account for almost 6 months. Not just little amounts, thousands. Shared business expenses, he'd labeled them. Only the cosigner could have approved those transfers. And guess who my cosigner was? My brother, Ryan. I'd added him years ago when I first opened the shop, because he had better credit and I was just starting out. It was supposed to be a temporary thing. I'd trusted him. He'd used that access to help Mark siphon my profits while I was working 16-hour days filling orders. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theft. Something in me hardened that day. I wasn't going to just burn their reputations. I was going to bury their safety nets. I went quiet online, stopped responding to everyone. My mom texted a dozen times begging me to let it go for the sake of family peace. Megan and Mark both blocked me. Ryan didn't even try to explain. Fine. Silence gave me time to work. First, I gathered proof. I printed every bank statement, every transfer, every screenshot. I made a spreadsheet that traced the money from my account into Mark's, then into a shared account with Megan's name on it. They'd used it for hotels, restaurants, flights, even wedding expenses. They literally financed their affair with my work. Then I went to a lawyer, quietly, using a friend's address so nothing got sent home. She didn't even blink when she saw the paperwork. "This isn't just civil," she said. "If you want, we can push this as fraud." I wanted. We spent a week building the case. Meanwhile, I started planning the social fallout because people like them don't fear prison, they fear exposure. I still had access to my Etsy followers, about 20,000 people who loved my handmade art. They trusted me, supported me. So I drafted a business transparency post, complete with attached invoices showing how funds were stolen and what names they'd been transferred under. But that wasn't the only weapon. Remember the wedding photographer? Turns out she was a mutual friend from high school, and she'd seen everything go down when the voicemails played. When I explained what really happened, she was furious. She agreed to send me the unedited gallery before Megan could approve it for social media. Buried in the hundreds of photos was one perfect shot. Mark leaning too close during a dance rehearsal, Megan's hand on his chest, both of them laughing, caught mid-touch, unmistakably intimate. That image became my thumbnail. My post wasn't angry or dramatic. It was factual, detailed, devastatingly calm. I wrote, "For anyone wondering why I'm closing my shop temporarily, my business funds were stolen by two people I trusted most. Here's where your money went." Then I listed every transaction, every hotel, every lie. I scheduled it to go live the next morning at 9 a.m., right when they'd be on their honeymoon flight. But the night before it posted, I got another message from that same unknown number. "You're missing something. Check the date on the first transfer." I did, and when I saw it, my blood ran cold. The first transfer wasn't 6 months ago. It was almost 2 years ago, right around the time Megan first entered our lives. Meaning Mark hadn't started cheating because of her. He'd been using her. I thought Megan was the manipulator, the homewrecker, the woman who slid her way into my family and destroyed everything. But when I dug into those early transfers, I realized she wasn't the mastermind. Mark was. He'd been draining my business for nearly 2 years, long before he even met Megan. She was just another tool, a cover story. Here's what I found. The earliest transfer went to a consulting account linked to an LLC I didn't recognize. The name on it? Brightpath Logistics Solutions. I almost skipped over it until I remembered that was the company where Mark worked. His boss's small tech firm that managed supply chain systems. Except when I searched the business registry, the LLC's listed secondary officer wasn't his boss. It was him. He'd created a fake vendor company under his employer's name, rerouted small business payments, including mine, and disguised it as legitimate transactions. And because I was making frequent supply purchases for my shop, I never noticed those extra vendor fees. The rabbit hole got darker. One of the emails tied to that LLC account used my brother Ryan's contact info. When I confronted him via text, he didn't deny it. He just replied, "You don't understand. Mark said he was investing for you. He told me you were in on it." That's when I finally understood. Mark had convinced Ryan that we were partners, that the withdrawals were part of a shared business growth project. He probably dangled a profit cut in front of him to keep him quiet. And when Megan came along, she became the next pawn, someone Mark could manipulate for distraction and control. I used to think he cheated because he wanted her. But now I realized he cheated because it made sense. Because it gave him a built-in excuse for the money missing, the late nights, the work trips. Everything he did was a smokescreen for something bigger, fraud. He didn't just betray me emotionally. He was setting me up to take the fall. My name was on every single account. The transactions were tied to my business. If things ever blew up legally, he could vanish, and I'd be the one left holding the liability. That's why he married me in the first place. That's why he always helped with my shop finances, why he insisted on handling taxes, why he kept me too busy to worry about paperwork. And Megan, she was a distraction, an insurance policy. If anyone ever dug into the money trail, he could point the finger at her and say she drained the funds. But he underestimated one thing. I still had all the proof, and now I knew how to use it. I canceled my scheduled post. The online exposure would have ruined them socially, but I wanted something more lasting. Something that couldn't be spun as emotional revenge. So I went back to my lawyer, laid out every detail and told her, "I want this airtight." She smiled and said, "Then you'll need to make him hang himself." We came up with a plan that would make even his cold, calculating mind stumble. It involved a fake reconciliation, a hidden microphone, and one mistake he'd never see coming. You want the worst part? It wasn't lust that drove him. It wasn't a stupid midlife crisis. It was cold, practical calculation. And once I heard the how and the why, I realized I'd been married to a man who treated people like spreadsheets. I grew up in Cleveland. That's where Mark and I started our lives together. Cheap rent, late-night Etsy packing parties, the whole thing. We scraped by. I thought we were building something. Turns out I was building his exit strategy. After the wedding chaos, my lawyer got me access to a voicemail I hadn't heard before. One Mark left himself, recorded accidentally when he pocket-dialed his own voice memo app after a night out. I listened to it alone in my car in the Kroger parking lot because I couldn't bring myself to play it at home where the walls had our photos on them. In that scratchy recording, he didn't whisper or stammer. He spoke like someone reading numbers off a ledger. Once the LLC's cash flow stabilizes, he said, we'll have 12 months before anyone notices. She's too busy to audit anything. She trusts me with taxes. Ryan is useful. He signs. Megan's role is simple, distraction. Buy him the ring, stand pretty, and keep the family happy while we strip the accounts. He laughed then, a slow, satisfied sound that made bile rise in my throat. That laugh explained everything. He hadn't fallen for Megan. He'd recruited her. He'd recruited my brother. He'd built a tiny criminal ecosystem inside our family and funded it with my labor. Why? Because he wanted a life that wasn't incremental. He wanted fast money, status, an ego project he could point to and claim as his. He saw my Etsy not as my livelihood, but as an ATM he could wiretap. He used my trust, my willingness to let him help, to launder profits into shell accounts so he could funnel them into investments in a real estate flip in Sarasota he'd been drooling over for years. He'd told Ryan they were reinvesting in the business. To Megan, he'd promised a life with nicer hotels and fancy dinners. To me, he'd said he loved me. The most chilling bit wasn't the money. It was the contingency plan he explained like it was a product feature. If it blows up, he said on that voice memo, we have two plays. One, scapegoat Lauren, she's the owner on paper, we point fraud at her and cut ties. Two, quiet exit, sell the house, take what we can, vanish. Either way, we control the narrative. He said the word control like it tasted sweet. I kept replaying that recording until the words stopped making me flinch. He'd treated my life like a cost center to optimize. Marriage was a business contract to him, one where he could rewrite the terms at his leisure. My trust was an expense line he could eliminate. There's another line that sings in my head still. She's the backup plan. He didn't mean backup like emotional safety. He meant it like inventory, an asset to be tapped when needed. He called me convenient in one of the voicemails. Convenient, not loved, not partner, convenient. When I finally confronted Ryan with that voice memo, he said flatly, he made it sound like a plan for both of us. I believed him. No guilt, no apology. Just the absolution of someone who wanted profit more than a sister. Understanding why he did it didn't make me softer. It made me angrier. Because this wasn't an affair that got messy. This was a year-long, meticulously planned theft dressed up in romance. He weaponized our history and my own generosity. And it meant my revenge had to be surgical. Not a scream or a social media post. Something that would strip his control away and leave him nowhere to hide. Something rooted in law, evidence, and the one thing he couldn't manipulate, the paper trail. I remember sitting in the rental car outside the courthouse in Cleveland, hands white-knuckled around the steering wheel, feeling like every small decision I'd made over the last 6 months had led to this one hallway. It wasn't dramatic, no wild confessions, no cinematic stare-downs. It was paperwork, signatures, the slow, bureaucratic sound of systems catching up to a lie. My lawyer had been clinical and kind. We don't need theatrics, she said. We need proof, chain of custody, and pressure. So we let the evidence do the yelling for us. We turned over the voicemails, the spreadsheet trace of transfers, the wedding photographer's photos, the hotel receipts, and the bank's internal logs that showed the IP addresses and login times for those transfers. We put the USB that played on the reception table into an evidence bag. We even gave the prosecutor the voice memo Mark had accidentally left himself months earlier, the one where he laid out his plan like a product pitch. But the thing that finally cracked him was the tape he didn't know existed. Remember that fake reconciliation plan I mentioned? I didn't go alone. My lawyer sat in on a mediated meeting I arranged under the pretense of salvaging whatever civility we could for the family. It was just supposed to be a conversation. Mark came in smug, all practiced remorse. He wanted to spin a story where he was sorry, and we were stupid for not forgiving him. He wanted the camera off. What he didn't know was there was a second device, an audio recorder, running discreetly in the room, and the lawyer had it prepared as part of our evidence packet. He talked like he always did when he thought he was in control. Numbers, contingencies, who would sign what, how to shift blame. He explained the transfers like he was walking someone through a spreadsheet. We'll say it's reinvestment, make it look like payroll, Ryan signs because he likes the cut. He used the word control again. It was in his voice. Proud, bored, entitled. That recording, combined with the bank logs and the receipts, made the prosecutor's decision easy. Within a week, there was an indictment for fraud and theft against Mark and accomplice charges for Ryan. Megan was named as a witness, and after seeing the pile of evidence, she flipped, less out of remorse and more out of self-preservation. She gave a tearful statement about being manipulated and about how Mark had promised her things he never intended to follow through on. It was ugly, textbook moral bankruptcy, but it was true. The civil case closed faster than I expected. The court ordered restitution and froze the accounts tied to the scheme while the assets were traced. The bank cooperated once the prosecutor got involved. Once the paper trail was under a subpoena, there was no more plausible deniability. The house I'd thought we'd keep, it was put under temporary lien. The Sarasota flip he'd dreamed about never happened. My sister-in-law and brother, they spent the next year rebuilding reputations and apologies, public and private, and none of it looked sincere. As for me, I closed the Etsy shop with a simple post explaining the hiatus and thanking my customers for their patience. I didn't gloat. I didn't put up a victory banner. I filed for divorce, signed the final papers in a quiet office while the sun cut across the floor in a way that felt almost benign. I took what I could legally get back, enough to restart and rebuild, not to punish, but to survive. People told me revenge would make me hollow. It didn't. The work, the painstaking gathering of receipts, the hum of a printer in the dead of night, filled a space that grief had hollowed out. I felt fierce, not satisfied. Real closure came later, in small things. A late-night order arriving on time, a 5-star review for a custom piece that made me laugh, a friend who still called to ask how I was doing. Months later, at a cafe not far from where I used to pack orders, a woman came up to me and said, "Your coasters saved my engagement gift." She had no idea whose life had been shredded trying to make mine whole again. That's fine. Some jobs are for credit only. He thought I was a backup plan. He built a life that presumed I'd always be there to clean it up. I left him exactly where he planned to leave me, on paper, but this time I kept the receipts. Turns out being someone's backup plan is a great way to become your own front page.